we'll jump in. This is not a slideshow. This whole webinar will not be a slideshow. I've got about like 3 or 4 slides just to keep me on track here. Just talk a little bit more about how we think about our app and how we use it. So a couple slides and then a demo. I'll show you Hiba and my one-on-one as a meeting example and just how I kind of navigate around the app and use it. And then once you get a good look at what the end state is, I can take you through what it takes to kind of create all of that. So all the buttons you got to click and all of the super secret features you might not know to accomplish all of that. But first, before we jump in, a couple slides. So the intros, in case you haven't met either of us yet, I'm Brennan, I'm CEO, co-founder here at Hypercontext. And this is Hiba. Hopefully you've seen her emails floating around. You know what she does. She's senior marketing manager here for us, making sure all of you show up here and making sure I also show up here as well and do this. Okay, so to start, I think that maybe the most helpful thing is just to break down the ways in which we kind of see us helping here. And I think it starts with 3 things that are really important when you think about your job as a manager. And the first is what you're actually here to do. What have you been hired to do? And as much as as a co-founder or as a CEO, that you might think it's different, but the truth is, I'm an employee to our own company, and in a real way, I've been hired to do a job. And so, what is that job, and what do we have to do? That kind of trickles down and up. Everyone kind of has that, and every quarter you have those quarterly priorities that are the most important thing. If you don't do them, you're in trouble. If you do a great job of them, you're stellar, standout. And then there's kind of the harsh realities a little bit of day-to-day life, which is what are we doing every single day? So I might have a quarterly priority, and yet I also might be doing a whole bunch of urgent, low-value things that might not line up. And also a reality of our job. There's a lot of fires you got to put out and jump to and do. And then the other thing as a manager that we're also somewhat responsible for is morale and motivation of our team. And interestingly, we kind of know that at the intersection of these 3 things, if you have great morale and motivation on your team and your weekly actions kind of ladder to the, are overlapping with what are your quarterly priorities, then there's a good chance you're doing a great job, right? If you're finding yourself in a couple of these areas where you're only focused on the week and you don't know what your quarterly priorities are, you might be finding yourself in a situation where you're rudderless or you're burnt out or you don't see your impact or your team doesn't. If you're only focused on morale and motivation, if you're only focused on keeping everyone happy, you're probably not going to keep everyone happy. And same if you're only focused on quarterly priorities and not following through on those other things, you're probably actually not going to hit them. So as I think about the role of a leader, the role of a manager, I mean, really the role of a team member as well, it's for any high growth company, it's about how do you stay in that middle area? How do you make sure that every single day you're focused on things that are high morale, focused on quarterly priorities, and that you're doing those things every single week, that your weekly actions are kind of staying congruent with it. And ultimately, that's kind of where we like to place our product. That's what we, the features that we like to build is things that keep drawing you to the center. We all know if we're there, things are better. So that's really what we're here to do. So the first is goals, or I would say like arguably the last is goals, because you do that the least frequently, but also the most important. And so the first is goals. How do we accomplish that in app? And I think the nice thing about how we've done this compared to a ton of other people is we've been very, very focused on making sure that your quarterly priorities become your weekly priorities. And when that's true, you tend to hit them at a much higher rate. The alarming stat there is you're 95% more likely to actually hit them. And I'll talk about why and how you accomplish that. The second is those actual weekly things. We I think what's the saying? Mike Tyson's saying, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. Everyone has great quarterly kickoffs, great plans, great strategy sessions, and then you get that email that comes in, and you've got to put out that fire. And I think meetings are this amazing opportunity or moment as a manager or leader that you can kind of course correct a little bit and either address the urgent or reprioritize the important. And I'll show you a couple strategies to do that and increase collaboration in your team. It's gonna be great. And then the final thing is morale and motivation. We all know if you have a high, high morale sales team, they're probably going to sell more. If you have an engineering team with high morale, they're probably going to ship, better quality code. And yet, for the most part, we know about these things in retrospect, right? We know when people are burnt out. We don't know if people are burning out, or at least we seemingly don't care. And so I'll talk a little bit more about how you can kind of check in on some of those things and get a barometer for that, so that you're on top of it and can adjust, right? Whether you're adjusting your goals or your weekly actions to make sure that morale stays high, so that quality and output stay high on your team as well. That's about it. Couple slides, couple confettis. We're going to jump into the app. Okay, so we're looking at Hypercontext right now. This is our application. This is a real one. This isn't a demo. This is what Hiba and I actually use at work. You can see here along the left, I have my calendar. This is my real calendar, all the stuff I've got to stay focused on and get done. And I'm actually in Hiba in my workspace here, our one-on-one meeting. I'll walk you through all this. And the spoiler is I actually spend a lot of my time between these two tabs, our application and calendar. So I'll show you how that works as well. But first, you'll see here we have our agenda. Hiba and I, every single time we meet, we focus in on our goals, some of the long-term personal goals that we're looking at, where we're at, how we're progressing towards it. We talk about insights into our weekly metrics, particularly from a marketing perspective. You can see there's some next steps as well. And then growth tests we're looking at, and personal growth, some questions that she has. You can see here, all of these are added by Hiba. This is something that if you're probably joining in on the call, you might be wondering, how the heck do you get that to happen? And I think the biggest tip I have here, and maybe Hiba, you can jump in and give that answer from your point of view, is just be very clear about the expectation, right? This is Hiba's meeting. This is her agenda. She organizes it and runs it and whatever. I'm there to serve her. So I need to know what she wants to talk about in order for me to serve her. And if there's nothing there, I'm going to prompt her to ask those questions, but push her to add things to the one-on-one. So one of the ways I think we're able to keep team members' calendars relatively light and clear is if there are quick things or urgent things or stuff maybe that feels like can require a meeting. If Hiba asks me, hey, do you have 30 minutes on Thursday? I'll say, do you want to just add it to our one-on-one and talk about it Monday?
Yeah.
And then that keeps things free, but I'll let you jump in there.
I think it's really helpful, like as a tool for me to manage up as well. I think especially, for me personally, from my perspective, I report into the CEO, and Brennan's calendar is a nightmare compared to mine. And that's because he just has so many things he's got going on. He's got a ton of external calls. And so for me, finding time with you is really hard on most weeks because you're pretty back to back. And so I think that there's a lot of things that you and I tackle asynchronously through Slack, but when it requires a much bigger conversation, like you said, we don't have to book that 30-minute meeting. Or like in most cases, probably not all cases, we don't have to have like that quick chat that turns into an hour. I think adding it here gives us a bit more time to think about it. That way, when we actually meet in our one-on-one, you've been able to think about that item, that context that I've given you. And that hour conversation ends up turning into, we've both thought about it, we have our thoughts, we come into it, and that just turns into a 5-minute conversation instead. And then I think for me, next steps makes it so much easier to just toss them in. And I'm like, Brennan, here are 10 things I need from you this week. Especially with so many things going on from different marketing campaigns. We're in a very testing phase. I find it a lot easier to get Brennan to do things. because expecting him to work in the marketing, marketing uses Notion for project management. So expecting him to go in there, but also work through, I guess, linear, which is engineering, and then soapbox. Like it's just too many places to expect you to be. So for me, I have a lot of, I guess, not faith, but like I know if I put it into hypercontext now, it's actually going to happen. And I think that's been really beneficial. And obviously you and I meet every week. And so I think at the size of team that we are, it's nicer because half of our conversations are probably strategy and update focus. But the other half are growth and all of the things that you want to talk about in one-on-ones and motivation and things like that. And also just when I have questions around management, like this is a really good space to get coaching on that because I'm a fairly new manager as well. Yeah, but I think this saves us a lot of time throughout the week, is just having this dedicated space.
It gives me a place to just dump the thought so that I don't have to remember it, which I'll probably fail at. But Hiba brings up a really good point in managing up. I think there's like two other things about our agenda here that works really well. One is Hiba does manage up, and she primarily uses our tool to manage up outside of just the fact, when she is herself, she's managing up, but primarily I would say uses the tool to hold me accountable to things. I think the other thing is because we have, we can have as much time as we want theoretically, but because we know when we can rely on an hour a week where we're pretty focused and I'm paying attention and, I have no other distractions, we can kind of rely on that time to go through as much as we can get through. And while an hour seems like a lot, we've got a lot to go through, and it actually isn't necessarily a lot of time. And so in order to get through what we need to get through, like we kind of have to have an agenda. We kind of have to document some of these things, or else we'll find ourselves in situations where a week's gone by and we haven't gotten done what we want to get done. So we have a lot of things to focus on. I'll show you, I am kind of failing Hiba a little bit, and I'll show you how I can remedy that in a second. But you can see she's got some questions in there. On the off chance we do have some time, we can kind of go through those, and then we have a couple ideas that I've either mentioned to her in passing or we've talked about, and she's just jotted down there. We can open them up in a little bit. Okay, we'll go over to next steps. You can see I owe her things. So there's a couple things I said I would do. I either have to follow up and check, and she's got a couple things there, so we go through. And then there's just a bunch of unassigned things that we've talked about doing. We don't want to lose track, and we've put them in there. Stored in our past meetings, sort of things we want to do, but no real timeline, no real person assigned to it. Just stuff that we want to track. And it's nice to go back and be like, oh yeah, we said we were going to do those things. We still want to do them. If we do, we put them in the actual plan. You can see all of our past meetings, all documented if we want to go check it out. One of the things that I love about our tool is our Insights tab. And what I love about this is I'm able to, in about 1 second, get a good sense of how I've been managing Hiba and what blind spots I have as a leader. And the reason I love that is because if I only had one direct report and one job, I would care a lot about this. But because I have a lot of context switching I have to do, the amount of time I have to care about these things is just squished. And so while I care a ton, I can't dedicate the same amount of time and attention towards it that I want. So when I go over to Insights, this gives me a quick way to ensure I'm living true to the things I value as a person and a leader. And so what this does is it takes the agenda that we currently have and our past meetings, all of them that we've ever documented, and it gives us a good graph. And what you're seeing here on the gray is over the history of our time together, Hiba and I are way out of balance, right? Historically, we've been spending so much time talking about work-related things that we're not really seeing this nice rounded conversation graph here. Recently, in the past 30 days, we've been pushing the envelope a little bit more into growth and work. And so you can see us kind of pulling down on work. And you see we want to maybe balance that out with motivation. I just gave you a little spiel that I think motivation and morale is really important. Hiba and I haven't talked about that in the past 30 minutes. That's not, or sorry, 30 days. That's not a good sign. So what our app is saying is, based on the recent conversations, we should probably address that. So I'm going to click motivation, and it's going to recommend a couple questions that will pull me a little bit further into the motivation category. So let's check in on maybe 2 of those things this week. When I go back over to our agenda, you'll see at the bottom, I've added a couple questions that might open up a conversation about Hiba's motivation. And I don't have to sit there and be creative for 15 minutes to kind of come up with some of those ways. I saw a question come in about how do we do that? So the answer is whenever you add an item to your agenda, we have a little machine learning script that runs in the background, so a little AI that will categorize all of your text into 16 different signals, and those signals get categorized into one of 4 of those framework categories. And so in this case, the topic there is motivation. I can recategorize that, and it actually trains our model so that over time it gets smarter and smarter and smarter and better and better and better.
Within their specific community, right?
Within their specific community. So if you have specific acronyms you use about values, for example, that are always relating to motivation or always relating to growth, or you have specific KPIs that relate to work or not, you can categorize those. You do it a couple times and it gets pretty close to 95% accurate pretty quickly. If any of you in the chat are tech people, you might be like, well, you added an example question that showed motivation. If I was to add something just with text, how are our ads performing on Facebook? Because I'm curious. We'll click into that and you can see that that's been categorized as work. And even small things like how's life, which would be a pretty high level question, motivation. So you can see that without even paying attention to it, as you're adding to your agenda, we're kind of starting to build a set of kind of coaching recommendations for you as a leader to get more out of your team. This works in team meetings, on one-on-ones, across the board. I'm just showing you one on here.
Right. I think this has been really powerful too, not just as a manager. I think this has been awesome, like for direct reports as well. Because sometimes for me, I'm like, with us, we've been working together for over 2 years. How do you have new conversations? And thankfully, we add a lot of new questions based on the managers that we talk to. And so like selfishly, that's beneficial because I have more and more questions that I can just toss in our agenda. And while it might feel like, are we really going to talk about this? We do. And it's like a really cool, interesting conversation that we wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah.
So I don't know, less brain power for both managers and employees, in my opinion.
Exactly. And I'll show you in a couple different ways that we kind of encourage some of these behaviors. So you can see over here in our insights graph, we're rounding out. And the goal here for me is just to try to get something that looks a little bit more like a circle. So, well, initially we were a little bit more like a triangle blob. This is a little bit more circle-like. And so I can say, all right, we've made some progress. We've stood up a little bit more towards our values. And just like Hiba said, this is open to her as well. This is her meeting. She runs it. She controls her own destiny. One of the big things I want to promote to every direct report I have is the one-on-one is your meeting. Grab the reins. The Insights tab is there for you. And the benefit that they have and Hiba has is any of these questions. First of all, it's like the largest library of suggested questions in the world. So whether you're using those ones or you're opening up our suggestions here and filtering to those areas as a direct report or as a manager or in a team meeting, whatever, I literally have no idea. And I've run this campaign. I have no idea the full extent of the suggested questions we have. There are so many of them that have been battle tested by other managers that Hiba can just write a real question she legitimately has or a real issue she wants to bring up and blame it on our app. And so that's been one of the biggest things I think that people can secretly get out of the app is you can kind of blame some of these awkward conversations or questions on the app and go into conversations that would otherwise feel like awkward to bring up or hard to bring up. I'm going to quickly show you goals. Oh, okay, go for it.
I was just going to say there's one quick question around how can you add next steps that are unassigned?
It's super easy. So on any of these, I'll just go test. I'll quickly answer this, but I'll also say I'll go through how you get to this state in a second from a blank agenda. But adding next steps at any point in time, you can click open any of these items on your agenda. add that next step. We'll add test. And by default here, we're unassigned and we have no due date. So this next step is not assigned. We can assign it to me or to Hiba. If I was to write something like Brennan to do this by Friday, we're going to pick up on the fact that I said Brennan and Friday. And so we're going to assign that to Brennan and assign it to Friday. So that's how you would do it. But I'll go through in a little bit more detail how you get everything into this state in just a moment, I think. The last thing maybe I'll cover here is goals, and then I'll just show you how we use this in practice. So over here on goals, we have a couple that are ongoing. We can open it up and you can see there's a, what do we want to do for future hires? What do we want to do for budget? All of these things. Typically, we leave the icon of pencil when we're still working on it. And that means we can collaborate. All of this is live. All of this is shared. The other really nice thing, and I'll just share this is usually how I do it, is we have literally the largest library of goal examples, OKR examples on the internet, broken up by every single role. So if you've never managed someone in DevOps before, here are real goals for a DevOps person that have been submitted by other companies that do manage DevOps, and you can take that or steal it. And what's nice about this is as you're kind of flexing into other functional areas or someone wants to learn a specific thing, you can go in and say, for a marketing manager and editor, let's click this, steal that goal and edit it together and tweak it so it fits our business. And the nice thing about that is this allows us to offload a lot of the creative energy from a manager perspective, from my perspective of coming up with everyone's goals. And then again, push that to Hiba and say, hey, Hiba, open up this library and find like 15 you think are good. And then let's narrow it down to like 3. The other superpower of goals is there's this little toggle which will default turn on, which shows them up on the agenda. So every week when Hiba and I have our weekly one-on-one, we have this magic item called Let's Talk About Personal Goals, where we're able to see the progress on those personal goals, open them up, update them, see what's happening, and ensure that we're talking about those every single week. The nice thing about that, like I said earlier, if you do talk about them every single week and you're there as accountability partners for each other to get those things done, 95% more likely to hit them. It's a little simple thing, but it turns out most humans do bad on goals because they forget to focus on them. So if you can have one quick, easy hack to hit your goals, it's focus on them first and focus on them every single week. Way more likely to hit them.
Yeah, I think the benefit here is in the past, I found a lot of goal platforms add a lot of work because they want you to formalize every little thing. And I think from an actual habits perspective, they still live in that platform and it's just another place you have to go and look, or it's a spreadsheet that you have to continue to update. But I think part of it is probably how often you talk about goals and how often you set those touch points up at your company or on your team. And thankfully for us, our one-on-ones are weekly, same with Nicole and myself, and our team meetings are bi-weekly. So we talk about goals every single week or every other week at the absolute, probably max. But this has been the biggest unlock for me. I remember being so excited when it came out because it's literally so impossible to forget about. We're always going to open our agenda. That's a habit we've built. That's how we prepare for our meetings. And now that's always there. Before we pop into the next thing, Brennan, when next steps are added, are they meant to be a discussion topic at the next meeting? Are they meant to be more of a task management thing? What's kind of best practice?
So best practice is if it's a next step, if it's a discussion point, I would use description for that. And if it's something you want to track, it's a promise, it's a commitment, it's something that you said would happen, or someone's got to do something. I would document that as the next step. I'll show you what that looks like in a couple other meetings. But that's normally how I would do it. So ideally, every next step probably should have someone who's responsible for it, and realistically a date when it should get done. One thing I want to show, and I think I'll kind of weave my answer into that of why is, obviously I don't just have a one-on-one with Hiba. I've got a whole bunch of other one-on-ones, a whole bunch of other meetings. You can see this is like next steps. I promise a lot of things in those meetings. Yeah, I'll do that, or I'll get that done, or I'll tell that person about those things. Usually either I document it as a next step for myself, or someone documents it for me, and they all exist there. You can see I have 21 of them that are happening right now, and I got to make sure I do those. If I don't, then I look like I'm doing a bad job. What I'll show you though really quickly is how I kind of manage a lot of that chaos, because most of these are my internal meetings. I also have a ton of external meetings. You can see it all here. Some of them are things I've got to like actually block time on my calendar to work on, but a lot of them are just different meetings with customers or people in the community or whatever. And so because I'm back to back in a lot of days and I don't necessarily have a ton of time for everything, you'll see I probably am living more out of my calendar and Zoom and Google Meet maybe than a bunch of other apps. And so we have a really powerful Chrome extension that brings everything I just demoed to you over here. So anything I promise that's been assigned to me that has a due date on it will show up in that Chrome extension as a next step. It's also going to show up in my Google Calendar. So you can see on the 26th, apparently I have a couple things that I've got to do. Oh, and I did do that. And I can check that off within there. And then some of these meetings, like Hiba and I have a one-on-one, there's 10 things in there that we've got to talk about. I can click that little hypercontext icon, or I can go in and click open hypercontext in the event. And then I can kind of see everything I was just looking at here, including those suggested questions, just within my calendar sidebar. And that allows me to quickly kind of jump in between meetings, add the things I want to add. And I'm often thinking like, oh yeah, okay, when I talk to GP next, I'll bring that up. And so I open up GP's one-on-one, or I open up Mark's meeting I have, or I open up my management meeting. And I go in there, I add those things that I need to add. Which is really, really great. If you're using Google Meet for any of your internal meetings, I'll do this again with Hiba's one-on-one. And I believe I will have to do this very quickly. If I click join, once it loads up. One of the largest benefits of having that Chrome extension, which integrates to both Calendar, it also integrates to Google Meet. So when we do actually meet, Hiba's going to join this video call. I'm going to join this video call. And along the side, what's automatically popped open is the Hypercontext sidebar. And we're able to go through and do all of this kind of face-to-face talking, typing, following along. And so I don't have to remember, oh yeah, that's what I put. I put it on the agenda. It's just when I'm in there, when I'm talking to Hiba next, it appears. And that workflow works really, really well for me. So as I jump between meetings, my agenda kind of magically pops up. And I'm able to offload some of my brain. It's very cool.
This is my favorite part of the whole platform.
You can,
like hands down.
Yeah, you can do that with so that the calendar, the Google Meet works. You can do some of that with Microsoft Teams as well. And Zoom has just opened up app development. They actually don't have their docs released, but I've talked to a couple of people over there, and so we'll be doing the same thing for Zoom at some point. There's a couple other things you can do in the calendar with that extension. So if you wanted to do any of those meeting ratings, you can go in there. The one thing I'll show you as we set up and get into the state is you can have different meeting rating questions. So for our product meeting, I actually asked the team if we're on track towards our goal or not. If we're, and we celebrate if we are. Engineering, if it's about performance level, so green, yellow, red. I didn't attend that one. And Hiba and I, when we actually meet, I'm more, because it's a one-on-one, talking about morale, motivation, those types of things. So I look for what's the outlook, right? And when I think about our relationship, when I think about her relationship with work, if I'm able to do a 14-day forecast, is it going to be sunny or is it going to be stormy, right? And this is really helpful to go back in time and say, when it's performance review season, or when we want to evaluate what's happened, to kind of go into meeting notes for a stormy period and figure out what was the pattern here that was causing storms, or what was the pattern here that was causing sunshine, and maybe we can kind of create more of those moments. So for a lot of these things, including like finishing those meetings, I can do a lot of this within my calendar. and I don't necessarily have to jump into the app unless I need to. And I'm there when I'm usually running a meeting. But if other people are running the meeting, I'm normally in the Google Meet. And that's kind of how I stay on top of everything. Okay, so let me share how we can set all of this up. But before I go into it, like Hiba has been saying, this is ideally an intimate, fun, small group. So I don't have to demo the generic stuff. I can demo things that everyone here is super interested in. So if anyone has something they want me to show or see, just add that in the chat, and I can get into it. Or if you have questions about any of that other stuff, I can get into that as well.
I think one quick question that came up as well is if we can talk about guest users, so meetings with clients versus internal team members.
Sure.
And then an example of a team meeting, and I think we can show the marketing one, should be fine.
Cool, yeah. Okay, yeah, let me show you a couple of those things, and maybe if you're doing, if you're doing a lot of external meetings, I can show you a couple other things that might be pretty neat. Let me just quickly show you what a team meeting could look like. And I'll show you a couple of the functions that are over there. So pro tip number 1, Command K, if you're on a Mac, or Control K on PC, pops open this little jump to. So I'm going to quickly jump over to my co-founder management meeting, and I'm going to show you a couple of things that we do over there that's really fun and cool. So we've got a recurring agenda over here. Every week we talk, as you can see, about our goals. We review our metrics. We talk about a couple other things, and employee news. They're all repeating. That means they're standing agenda items. Every single week we talk about them. They never go away. We can't get rid of them. That's the order that we do everything. If I open up our metrics review, you can see we have an attachment here that says Metrics 2020. It's a Google Sheet where we track all of our KPIs. Everyone in the company has access to it. And Graham and I, when we meet, we talk about it. And so what's really handy is having that as a recurring item with links, meaning that this link is going to be there every single week. And if I click it, we have a really strong Google Sheets integration, or Google Slides integration, Google Docs integration. So you can preview this file within our app. And so as we look at our dashboard, and as we look at some of our trends, and as we look at some of these numbers, I can go in and summarize our feelings. If there's anything wrong with the KPI, if we've been alerted over something, we can go in and type, get a next step. Graham can jump on it. I can jump on it. Someone can jump on it. And we are able to address that within the week, usually, versus seeing something in a Google Sheet and doing a comment and then that being lost in Google Drive. So we do that. We've got our goals there. We've got a couple other things, and sometimes because I demo some of these things, we try to keep it a little bit hidden. But for the most part, that's how we do that one. There's also maybe the product weekly sync is an interesting one. You can see we have it's a little bit, I would say, like a little bit more formal on the team side. So I usually have a standing agenda, a couple of recurring items, and then other things. In teams, because there's so many more people, sprint planning, Hiba. There's usually one person who's running it. So Hiba runs the marketing, sprint planning. You can see we've got a standing agenda, a whole bunch of recurring items that we always talk about, and then we have other stuff down below. And so as the team has things like, I want to do that, I got to bring it up, they add it to the list at the bottom. And once we get through our standard fair stuff, we go into the other stuff list and we just start tackling what we can.
I think the thing that's helped as well, just in terms of not going meeting overload, which is something you actually drilled into me, is that we run off 2-week sprints. And this is something that was fairly new for me as a marketer. Like, it's typically, from what I've seen, a very engineering product focused activity until I came to Soapbox at the time, Hypercontext now. And so marketing runs on full 2-week sprints. And what we do is, we set that sprint in the workflow together in that team meeting, but within those 2 weeks, we don't change that scope. If we end up having extra time, like if we have a really productive 2 weeks, maybe we can add some more things in there. But for the most part, I would say we try to kind of seal the deal there. We say, this is our next 2 weeks, let's not touch it. And I think that helps because we stay focused on that 2-week time period. And it's not like we need to do this and this and this and this. And yes, things are going to come up, but at the same time, I find that it reduces the need to have meetings to say like, oh, we've got a new project we're working on. Let's have a meeting about that. That's something you can plan for in that sprint. And so I think like beyond just the meeting, just having that kind of practice is really helpful that you've drilled into me. So
a lot of it is like deferring and batching, right? So I come from maybe more of an engineering background. So if we've set our priorities for 2 weeks, I mean, we should be able to predict what we need to work on in 2-week chunks. If we can't predict what's important over the next 2 weeks, then we should work on how we can predict. So it should be pretty easy to do. The next 2 weeks, these are going to be our priorities. Let's not change them, and let's have a little bit of self-restraint to hold ourselves accountable to that. To be honest, that's probably the person who needs to flex that self-restraint the most is probably me. I try to do a good job of it, but the team can hold me accountable to it. And if there's something that comes up like, oh, this is really important, we should really do this, then I can add it to the list, but we defer it to the next sprint, right? So that means like once we get through the stuff we decided was important, we can get to the next set of priorities, which is only a week away. Like it can wait a week. Most things can wait a week. If something can't wait a week, then everyone usually agrees, oh shoot, that can't wait a week, and we just get it done, and we take the bottom thing on the list and move it a week or whatever. But for the most part, if it can wait, we try to defer it to the start of the next sprint, and that takes a little bit of discipline and self-control. The other thing takes a little bit of discipline and self-control is batching topics to a meeting. So instead of having a meeting, a quick check-in, a quick call, oh shoot, what do I want to do? It's add it to the one-on-one, right? It's add it to that list. We have dedicated time together. We're going to spend an hour, we're going to spend 30 minutes, whatever it is. Add it as an item to that meeting. And in that meeting, we'll talk about it. If it can't wait that period of time, then let's talk about it now. But the amount of things that probably can wait 3 days, that's most of it, right? The issue is you might have so many things on that list that you need to talk about in a one-on-one with someone. It's feedback, it's project, it's questions, it's whatever. You might have so many things on that list that you won't get through them all. And then that's actually how you get efficient meetings, because then you start getting into, let's prioritize the stuff you want to talk about first. That's most important. Let's make sure everyone shows up prepared, right? Let's make sure you're going in ahead of time and reading. Let's spend most of the meeting talking about resolutions, answers, summaries, decisions, instead of spending most of the meeting talking about what the issue actually is. So I can show you how we do some of that. All right, I'll jump in, show you how to set all of this up so that you're off to the races here. I've got a showcase demo one-on-one. The truth is there's not too much difference between a one-on-one or a team meeting. One-on-ones have 2 people, team meetings have more. I'll also show how this can work if it was external. So what that guest user scenario looks like as well. Okay, so the first thing is the most basic level, you got to get items on your agenda. That lets you prepare, that lets you offload part of your brain. So if you're thinking you need to bring something up with someone, you might think about interrupting them and causing a little bit of chaos in their day. If it can wait 2-3 business days to the meeting, just add it to the list. These are just a list of things that you want to talk about. That's what an item is for us. So if I've got to talk about, let's say I got to talk about customer A, I want to talk about project, I have a question about project B, or I'm super curious about, insights into the campaign C. I can just add those things there. I don't have to cause chaos in Hiba's day and say, hey, Hiba, get me all the data about campaign that's happening and I need it now. I can say, that data can probably wait till Monday, but I'm probably going to ask you on Monday, just heads up, if you want to get any of that done ahead of schedule. So I'll just add it in there. That's pretty easy. We're in a pretty good spot. You can see I've got some prompts now to add a couple next steps. So when we actually go into the meeting, I can do that. If you want just a collapsed view, because this can get pretty hairy, you can click this little view standard compact, which will hide some of those things. Now, if I'm a nice person for Hiba, I'll put the things that I think are most important at the top. and that will help her understand. So just drag and drop over there. And then if I'm super nice, I'm going to add a description. And this is just going to give her a little bit extra context of why I'm adding this, what I want to get out of it. And I think someone asked in the chat there, if there's specific topic points you want to hit, say it's a team meeting and you want to go through a checklist of 15 things before you move on to the next item. The description is a really good way of doing that. I kind of think of these as subject lines of an email and bodies of an email. So I can go in and say, talk to ABC, and they said we should expect, 15% conversions on certain things. Let's talk about campaigns that are running and ad sets and ads, right? So I'll just write it like that, almost like it's an email. I've hit enter. I've added a couple of those bulleted lists. I'm gonna now save that. We'll do some formatting for you just to make it look a little bit prettier. And you can see we now have an item we want to talk about, campaign C. And I've got a couple talking points that I want to hit. When I go back to the agenda, you can see, when Hiba comes in, she'll see, oh, Brennan wants to talk about campaign C and particularly these things. And he's probably going to push me towards 15% conversion. All right, let's see where we're at, right? And that lets her prepare a little bit. And again, after she's read that, she might want to set that to compact because we know what we're talking about there. And that lets you drag around and organize a little bit more. Okay, now in this case, bulleted list. Whoop, whoop.
So I will quickly say for anyone, because I fall in this bucket, who's not the greatest at Markdown, there's a ton of free online like Markdown things if you want to go super haywire on how you're basically formatting these descriptions or your agenda. But it's all Markdown. You could add GIFs in here. You could make things super massive and crazy if you really want to celebrate. Yep. Or if you want to just keep it simple, it's fairly easy. But all this is done through Markdown. And I typically use an external Markdown note. I don't know what to call it.
We will be, this is like a top secret thing. So you can do all of these things and we let you do it. We currently don't show the UI to do it, but that's something that we'll probably get to. But for those that are out there that write code, you can put little code snippets in your items in the off chance that you're talking to your engineering manager about any of that stuff. Or if you're like I was saying, if you want to do links, there are ways to link to specific things. And I do this in a bunch of different ways. So if you needed to, this is, oh my goodness. This is kind of pro tip territory, but you can do a lot of those things. In our marketing meeting, we have a GIF of something going on there. So anyways, pro tip, another pro tip as we go through, you can check it out. Now, in this case, let's just go to Compact to see some things. If this was a team meeting, I might want to set up a section so I can click this little insert hover bar and go add section and maybe go standing agenda. I'll show you how I do this in a different meeting as well. Maybe go like other things. That lets me just break some things up a little bit more. I can drag them around, et cetera, et cetera. Now maybe campaign C is something we want to talk about every single week. So I can click open to this and change this from does not recur, which means it's a one-off, to recurring. That means it's going to show up every single meeting that we have. Let's say that that's the case. You'll see it's also noted on my list here with that little loop icon that is going to repeat. And I can also quickly set those couple things to repeating just right there. Okay, so let's pretend that this meeting is now set up. The next step is going to be actually in this meeting. So when it does occur, when this meeting does happen, we should talk about these things. The first thing to know is when you're done talking about something, you can check this item off. And so just like a to-do list, when you're done talking about it, check that off. We'll hit you with some confetti. And that's the basic thing you want to do. When you're done with something, mark it as done, you get to move on. We're going to prompt you in that moment to be an awesome person for your team and ask you to summarize. And so summarize is basically just taking those final notes, whether it's a decision, whether it's the state, whether it's the feeling, whether it's whatever the important thing is that everyone has to remember, we're going to ask you to document that there in that discussion, summary of discussion piece. So again, you could do markdown if you need to do markdown, but in the case with customer, they could be super happy and really like the next steps feature. It's saved. We now get to store a lot of that to memory, and if we need to, we can come back and see what the resolution was. So if you're ever in that state where you're like, didn't we talk about this last week? Make sure you document what you talked about in there, and you can kind of very quickly alleviate that problem. So you'll see here, we've marked that as done. We've closed and summarized it. We've actually made this blue because we did a good job as a boss, and we have added some notes there. Now, in the off chance that like customer is unhappy and really hates the next steps feature, what we might want to do in that situation is document what we're going to do, right? If this is really important, if this is an important customer, all customers are important, then we should follow up and do something about this. And that's where next steps comes in handy here, which is what are we going to do? Who's going to do what? Often in a meeting, someone will say, yeah, I'll follow up with them, or I'll do something or whatever. To hold people accountable, to make sure we're doing the things we're saying we're doing, very easy, just go in there and say, Brennan, to call customer B by Monday. And we'll do two things there. I've written Brennan and I've said Monday, so it's going to pick Monday for me, and it's going to pick Brennan. The reason I wrote it in that way is because that's most likely how I'm going to say it before I move on to the next item. Like, all right, before we leave customer, what are we doing? Oh, Hiba's going to do something. Okay, Hiba is going to, and just as you say it out loud, type it out, and then you'll get it in there. And again, I know someone asked, you can just write whatever you want, hit enter, and you can either assign it to yourself or uncheck that and not assign it to anybody. In this particular meeting, I'm the only one in it, so just by default assumes I should be the assignee. The only thing I'll show you here really quickly is you'll see that because I've added this next step, we've marked this item as open. So at this point, we've said, hey, we're not finished talking about this item until Brennan actually tells the group he did what he said he would do. So we're kind of defaulting to extreme accountability here. And what that means is this item is not going to go away until Brennan does what he says he's going to do. Now, of course, I can go in, check this box whenever I'm done, and we'll default check that off. But that's one thing that sometimes causes people confusion. So I'll just point that out. If you don't want to follow that, if you want this next step to go away, I'll show you what go away means in a second. I can click that little checkbox there. It's going to go away, and Brennan's still going to have to do that. And so that's how we get some of those things in the next steps area. So very quickly, I'll show you a really important part, which is clicking finish meeting. When I do that, it'll tell you what's going to happen, but basically everything with the checkbox is going to go away into this past meeting area. Everyone who's attending the meeting is going to get an email copy of all of the notes, and we're going to set up the next meeting. So I'll actually do that right here for you. And you'll see these two checkmark ones are going to go away because they were recurring. They show up every single time. They've been reset. They've popped back in. And we're ready to go for July 30th at 7 a.m., which is the next time we're going to meet. You'll see over here in the next steps tab, I now have one thing I said I would do, even though we cleared it off. It's been moved into past meetings. I still got to do it. So if you ever want to follow up just in this one meeting, you can see here's all the next steps historically that are not done that people have said they would do. And of course, if I ever get that done, I can check that off and be pretty happy with myself. I can view insights. I can view goals. Very easy to add a goal. Click that big button, type out what you want it to be, or of course, go in and steal a couple of our good ones. And the next time you have your meeting, you've got I think it's this one. I've relabeled it historically to goals. So we've got our goals there. Yeah.
I think just the last two things as we wrap up, Brennan, if you click into next steps, this is just more for Vanessa specifically. You're actually able, or maybe the top right next steps, the global one. Vanessa here, you're able to actually click through and sort next steps by person. So any of the collective meetings you have with any of these people, you'll be able to see their total next steps across all of your meetings or workspaces. That way you can kind of keep a hold. This is only for the meetings that you're both, or the workspaces that you're both a part of. Obviously, if Brennan has a one-on-one with someone else, that's their private space. I shouldn't be able to look into that. So you can access all of that there. And then one final question, Brennan, maybe if you want to answer from Dean, is that summarizing is great, but obviously someone needs to be tasked for this, and that person really understands what the summary should be. There's often several points raised by a bunch of people. So how do you capture that? I guess to start off, yeah, you can definitely add all of these things in the comments, and maybe you can show that you can use that comment as a summary. But for me, I think the value is you get that one final check as a group for whoever's writing the summaries to say, okay, here's what I have down. Is everyone on board? Is everyone aligned with this? I would treat it almost as like a last check for alignment.
Yeah. So if you've got a lot of things going on and you want to make a note of it and maybe not mark it as done, I would put that in the comments, and you can always kind of scan through, read through, catch up, and document your final thoughts there. Of course, you can add a summary and then mark it as not done. So you can always come back to it the next week if you want to check it out. What I'll show before I jump into that is the ability for templates, or sort of jump into some other things. So I can go in and create, of course, we have a bunch of templates for meetings. You've probably seen some of them before, but I can actually go in and create my own template. I can share it with my organization on business, or I can leave it on pro or free. I can leave it for myself. And what's nice about that is I can then go ahead and apply these templates to meetings that I have a lot. So in the off chance you are doing external meetings, whether they're client kickoff calls or whatever, you can document some of what you would do in a client kickoff call as a template. And then anytime you do have it, you could go ahead and apply that template. Of course, we do this with onboarding. We do this with certain favorite questions. If we want to add any of those things, and on business, I can share that with the organization. So the one thing I will say very quickly is there's a couple of things I showed here that are in pro versus business. So what those are, for the most part, adding things to your agenda, marking them as done, all of that stuff, that's all free. When you want to go deeper into the note-taking, accountability, insights, all of that stuff, that's when you get into pro. And then business is where you get into some of that organizational success. So that's where goals kick in. That's where the shared templates kick in. That's where some of the branding stuff, like uploading a logo, tweaking it, which might be good for if you are doing those external meetings as well.
Hi there, I'm Hiba from Hypercontext, and I hope you learned something out of that session. If you'd like to continue learning more about all things leadership, you can check out our latest video here, or you can subscribe to our channel below. You can also find us at hypercontext.com and join the conversation on Twitter or LinkedIn, and we'd be happy to chat. Thanks.